some kind of an incentive to get folks to come over here. So the one they came up with in the street in the old original city, that small 60-acre city, and anytime you see an alley or a way or a lane like that, they'll usually have street signs. They're public. That one we can't keep a sign on. They steal it. Philadelphia alley, I don't know. The medallions on the buildings, the black circles, really every building we're going to go by, those are Carolopoulos Awards. Those are awards of restoration excellence given when you voluntarily restore a building. We have about 3,500 of those currently in the city. That 60-acre city we started with today is 1,500 continuous acres of the stone. When you see buildings that look like stone like this, there's a little secret. The buildings are actually made of brick. They stuccoed over the brick and scored lines in the stucco to give you the appearance they're made of stone. Why would you do something crazy like that? Well, this was a wealthy city. Where they came from over in Europe, wealthy folks had stone cities. We didn't have any stone. They started building the city out of wood. Found out pretty quickly in a city prone to fire, wood might not be a good option. So they actually banned it as a building material, and now with nothing else to build with, they started building the city out of brick, which happens to be a poor guy's building material where these wealthy folks came from. So to dress it up, they just covered it up and drew lines in it to make it look like stone. Poor city built a brick disguised to look like stone because of vanity. We only have 3 stone buildings in the whole city today. They didn't build the first one until 1853. 100 is specific to this house. I don't remember what it says. Maybe you can come by and read it after you get off. The rectangle underneath, that's a National Register of Historic Places marker. That's a national landmark. You're all travelers. You came to Charleston. I bet you've been to other cities where you've seen those things and they were museums or specially used buildings. We got a little trouble with that in Charleston. We can't use them all for museums or special use buildings because we have 1,000 of them. We're living in them, we're working in them, we're worshiping in them. Oh, over here, this is a fire insurance company marker. In a city that was prone to fire, at one time we had 13 fire insurance companies. Each one had their own markers. Make sure you're peeking in between these beautiful landscapes, the gardens, the brickwork. 13 fire insurance companies. Each one had their own marker. They're collectible today. Cass, brass. That goes down. You buy your insurance. They come put the marker on the house. That guarantees you one thing, and it is not replacement value. That guarantees you that in a city where there's a real good chance your house will catch fire, when it does, the brigades are independent. So we also have the oldest congregation of Reformed Judaism in the United States. KK Beth Elohim Synagogue. Any Jewish folks on here? No. Well, we've got the oldest folks. We don't have. Peek down the shady walkways leading to the back, the private gardens. They own the house. They pay the small lease to the church every year for the land, just a few dollars. They didn't care about dressing them up. I think they're beautiful. I have no problem with those brick buildings. But then as you look down the street, we don't see a lot more brick. Well, we do, but it's all covered up. These are all brick buildings that have been disguised. Every one of these. Unless it's obviously wood, it's brick and stucco. The 3 stone buildings we have, all public buildings, no private homes. Narrow, deep lots. They laid the city out purposely in a way they were familiar with over in Europe. Over there, oftentimes, you paid your taxes based on how much street you took up, frontage tax. More crazy stuff like how many windows you had in the front of your house. Oh, great. Lacey Man's great. Yeah, he has to quit when we go by. They never taxed that way here, but it was a habit they were accustomed to. And here now, that makes your private garden by your house and your neighbor's house. So you got a place to go to cool off and relax, out of sight of the public.
Like
Yeah.
those brown things right there.
Yep.
Those big ones.
Yep.
What are those called?
Do you have a suspicion you know? No?
I think it's something to do with the earthquakes.
Yeah, and the stories reflect that. These are decorative cast iron washers. You know they're going to be there forever. You might as well make them look nice. Same purpose. Here comes a beautiful cypress wood house. On the left, this White House was built here in 1766. I wish my house looked that good. This house has one of those beautiful beautiful doors you see around the city. Have y'all been seeing these doors? They're beautiful, they're elaborate, they look like they go in the house. And whatever they're doing, I'm not going to wait for them. So as we go past, check out where the door actually goes. Well, no. Up on the porch. It goes absolutely nowhere. We're fancy and entitled. We don't have porches. We have piazzas. And that's a Charleston single house. Piazzas always face south or west. That's where the breeze comes from. A single house on a narrow lot is one single room wide. Every room in the house, red brick accents, blacksmith wrought iron, marble entrance. Looks great. Good shape, right? It ought to be. They just finished it 2 years ago. That's a brand new house. Look down the carriageway. You see the atrium down there. When you build a house in Charleston, behind that would have been the stable, the blacksmith shop, the carpenter shop, the kitchen house, the slave quarters. This whole row of buildings here supports the house that we haven't seen yet. It's up ahead. It's called the Miles Bruton Georgian Palladian Estate. It was built here in 1769. When it was built here, these buildings went to the back of the lot, and that was the Ashley River. This was the west side of the city. Today we're smack in the middle. They filled in about 4x4 square blocks of marsh back there and turned it into neighborhoods, probably late 1800s we'll call it. So this used to be on the water, and now it's smack in the middle of the city. Miles Bruton obviously made a pretty good living. You'll think so when you see the house. He made it in a terrible way. He made it on the backs of others. He was a slave importer. Karma caught up with him. He and his entire family were lost at sea shortly after the house was built. It went then to his sister, Rebecca Mott. She was living in the house in 1780 when the British came and occupied the city for 2 years during the Revolution. They decided this reminded them that they would make a great headquarters, so they came on over to let Mrs. Mott know about the plan. She was not on board with it, and she refused to leave, so she ended up hosting those officers at her table while they lived in her house for 2 years without her permission. Next time somebody says Southern hospitality, think about that. The iron on the front, just the plain gates and fences, are original to the house. The mean-looking stuff that carries above, ironically, was installed here 53 years after the house was built to protect descendants of a slave importer from a slave uprising. The house is my #1 favorite because it still stands intact. Everything is there. The house, the outbuildings, the defensive features. The slate sidewalks, everything is there. Years before this house was built. His grandson Patrick got lucky, married a rich girl, and because of name recognition, this became the Calhoun. The foyer there, Tiffany-inspired leaded glass. You know, the two houses, of course, had a connection. They were both built by George Williams from scratch. This was his house, the older daughter inherited. That was the younger daughter's wedding present. Today, they're not owned by the same folks, but they still have a connection. This foyer, 1989, Hurricane Hugo blew through Charleston. It blew open those 400-pound mahogany doors and shattered every piece of glass in the foyer. The artisans that repaired it went down to the house on the corner, studied the Tiffany glass, and used the techniques to come back and recreate this foyer. So they still got a connection, even now, because his son-in-law was friends with that jeweler in New York. So I like that they still have a connection. He did have a son, George Jr. He did not build him a fancy new house. I'm not even sure if he liked it. He bought him this old used house across the street. Built in 1770, that's 100 years older than Daddy's house. It didn't originally have that rounded porch. That's a porch, it's just out there, it's not doing anything. When he bought the house, didn't have it. And George Jr. and his wife used to host ice cream socials for the orphans in Charleston. Isn't that nice? One summer it rained, so they built that to make sure they were undercover the next year. Everybody's like, oh, he's so sweet, isn't that wonderful? They never adopted any of the orphans. They just gave them ice cream and sent them home. But they did get them out of the weather. These three houses, 1750s and 60s, they're separate properties. They're brick, dressed up to look fancy from the street. Beautiful gardens in the back. They are separate properties, but they always get lumped into a set that has an assortment of nicknames. My personal favorite, the Neapolitans. Yeah. Over here, looks like stone, but there's the brick showing through. 3 stone buildings, all public, no private homes. This house doesn't have any iron